So I recently read this book, American Nations, and it really changed my view and my thinking of this country and its history. He has this map of how America is today. He's thinking of nations as sort of different groups that have a different kind of way of thinking in our present day, and it really matches up well with voting results and other kinds of polls out there. Here's another sort of look at it. So he has 11. In this video, I just want to focus on 7, and here's a way that I color the same version of this poster here. So we're going to look at how these different nations might have developed starting on the East Coast in colonial times. So this will just be about the first 7 nations.
Here's the first region for us to look at. This is Yankeedom, the blue area. It's part of northeastern US and some parts of southern Canada. This would be a good place to pause and label or mark this on your map if you have one.
So we're going to show you where this area of Yankeedom began. It started right around the Boston area with the Pilgrims or Puritans coming along and settling, and that's about the area they covered in the 1600s. These are people who wanted to create a perfect world. They had this religious belief in what a perfect world would be, and that's what they tried to create. Over time they expand, as I draw kind of fast here, later into New York, mainly that New York and England area, and that's about where they were in the 1700s. This group, with that belief of a perfect world, they connected government and religion very closely. They really didn't believe in freedom of religion. They believed everyone should be following the kind of religion that they had. They really did not tolerate anyone who did not believe in the Bible the way that they believed in the Bible. They were Protestants, so they looked down on Catholics, but they also really looked down and disrespected Protestants who didn't share their exact belief in the Bible, especially ones who didn't believe in education and reading as the way that they did. And even still in this area of Yankeedom, reading and education, literacy, school systems are really important here. In this area, we have so many colleges in the New England and New York State area. And still there's kind of a culture of we know the right thing to do and other areas are all messed up and they don't know the right way to be. So in a way that Puritan pilgrim culture still survives today. So at about the same time that the Pilgrims were settling and starting up Yankeedom, right about that spot I just colored is where the first Virginia colonies were set up. Now, the colony around Virginia. Virginia in this Tidewater area. We use the word Tidewater for this area. It's a much smaller area, some coloring. This area had a very different reason for people settling there. This was not about creating a new, wonderful kind of world. This did not have a religious kind of idea behind it. This colony and some of the ones in that area were controlled by very rich landlords. This place was always all about making money. For those rich lords, for the people who'd invested money and loaned money for this colony to work out, and they wanted to get that money back. And then also for settlers, poor settlers who ended up coming to this area of Tidewater. This area was based on the same ideas of ancient Rome, if you can remember what ancient Rome was about a small percentage of really rich people, those lords in Virginia here. They owned huge areas of land and they controlled that land for thousands and thousands of very poor white people. Again, just like in Rome, these are like the plebeians having to do a lot of the work. So they get imported, brought in as servants, as workers. They had to work for a certain period of time. The society, these folks were also very much based on honor. This is an honor-based system in that area, and that carries through a lot of American history in that area, much more than up in Yankeedom or other places. Showing respect is very important to people in that area.
So speaking of making money, that's what this next region was largely about. We call this area New Netherland mainly because it was originally owned by the Dutch people of the Netherlands or Holland. In the 1600s, it was taken over by England, though, became an English colony. And this area is the most diverse, the most widely varying kind of number of cultures here. It's always been that way, and of course it's still that way today. So you had Dutch people who stayed even when it was taken over by the English. You had all kinds of different peoples coming here. It was right in the middle of those two other regions that had been set up earlier.
So all kinds of people came to this area, especially folks who didn't really feel like they fit into the sort of Puritan culture of Yankeedom, and they didn't really like the kind of society of really rich and really poor in the Tidewater area or much of anywhere else. So they fed in more this kind of area. Getting involved in trade, somehow a lot of these folks are involved in trading, and that includes slavery. You might be surprised the number of slaves that would have been in this area up here, and basically anything that made money, like the slave trade, was fair game. So they tolerate things, in good ways and in bad ways. Now, when we think of slavery, we probably think of this area I'm shading in now, the Deep South, and that makes a lot of sense. This area, there's no way around it. This area was founded on the idea of slavery. The first landowners here were these super rich, even richer than really any of the Tidewater lords. They'd had huge plantations growing all kinds of things in the Caribbean islands, and then the king allowed them to get some land here to try to grow some of the same things. And they brought over the same really brutal system of slavery that was in the West Indies, racially based. Again, you had some white workers up in Tidewater, but this area really always had African. They tried using Native Americans for a while, but the Native Americans really rebelled and ran back to their own homes. Africans couldn't do that. So this is kind of like the Tidewater system of ancient Rome. Think of that kind of like on steroids. It really cranked up. So again, the idea of having very rich people who are in charge, and the people underneath them, sort of like in Rome, like the plebeians, couldn't really do much of anything, especially when they weren't even whites, when they were darker skinned. So this has always had a very racially based system that, unfortunately, especially the Deep South, is still trying to get past that, even hundreds of years later after it began. So we can still see echoes of that past in the present. Now this area in between, this is what we call the Midlands, and as you see me coloring in, it's this area really in the middle. So here's our fifth region, and the Midlands attracted families of all kinds of religions and languages who didn't even fit in really to New Netherlands, because they weren't really trying to get involved in the economic trade across with England or with other countries. They really were coming across here to get their own life for themselves. You had a lot of German people, Swedish people. This area attracted Catholics. In fact, one of the colonies, Maryland, was actually specifically set up for Catholic people to come along and stay away from Protestants. Again, you had Germans and Swedes coming over to basically stay away from anyone who wasn't German or wasn't Swedish. So it's not really like the idea of a melting pot of bringing all kinds of people together into America. This is more like a sort of a patchwork quilt. And I mean, you've got all these sort of different groups, like a town of German-speaking people next to a town of Swedish Catholics. You had some towns that were different kinds of Protestants, like the Quaker religion that we'll learn more about. Even some Jewish communities that would have been separate from everybody else. So they're not trying to intersect. And that's still kind of true for the Midlands today, that the Midlands is this sort of in-between group of folks who have a sort of keep to themselves kind of idea of what it means to be American. And often it's sort of the swing vote deciding issues. We see that throughout American history as we go through. But a lot of these folks are frankly just trying to stay out of issues, and they only help to decide if they absolutely have to. And the last group we're going to focus on, these are the people of the Appalachian Mountains. We call it sort of the Greater Appalachia region, right along those mountains. In colonial times, these people actually were deliberately, on purpose, they're staying out of the colonies. These are Scottish-Irish, Scots-Irish people of Britain. Have that Scottish or Irish kind of accent you might have heard of. And they're not English. They speak the English language, but they're trying to get as far away from the English Empire as possible. They come across to this new world. They want to have their own kind of place. So kind of like Yankeedom, they're pretty sure they've got the right idea. Kind of like the Puritans, they wanted to stay away from the way that England was running things. But as you see, they get far away from the ocean. This is, again, sort of an honor-based kind of society. Now, a lot of people think of this sort of places like sort of rednecks and hillbillies. Well, they are in the hills, and they do have that is kind of where that sort of accent comes from, is from sort of the Scotch-Irish. This area is a really fascinating one. Sometimes we'll call it the Backcountry. And again, these are people who just want to get things done the way that they want to get things done. That American idea of freedom and you can do your own kind of thing, that's a greater Appalachian kind of idea. So I'm just going to talk briefly about this area. I'm coloring in red here. This is not one of the English colonies. This area, though, still exists as a kind of a separate region. It's a part of Canada. We'll call this New France. It had a sort of a very French kind of focus to it. This is where the French settled their own colony. Quebec, Montreal, they're in this area here. So it's surrounding Yankeedom right there. This area was Catholic. This is where Catholics lived, again, French-speaking Catholics. And still this area has a largest percentage number of French-speaking Catholics. The difference between Protestants and Catholics is not really such a big deal today, but back in the 1700s, this was a big deal. So as you see, it's a fairly large region. A lot of this area didn't have any people in it, but still, if you're in New England or New York State and you look just a little bit north, you see a huge area of where Catholics are living, and they might be coming along to get you. This is also an area today where actually in Canada it's trying to break away. There are some people, French-speaking people in Canada, trying to separate from the rest of Canada, the English-speaking part of that country. And it almost worked about 20 years ago, and they might try to go for it again. Again, we call this New France. And there's one other little area you'll see later, right around the New Orleans area down in Louisiana. And we'll focus on that bit a little bit later. But again, you have a Catholic area in colonial times here. So in later videos, we'll look at how these nations sort of expanded westward, but you can probably compare this to the maps we were looking at before. But we'll get to that another time.